The millionaire sees his employee eating food from the trash and doesn't understand. The cold light of the kitchen reveals what was always there, invisible before his eyes. Like rain falling on an empty cemetery, the truth soaks him. While he accumulated wealth, she was collecting leftovers to feed her orphaned grandchildren. But in her hands, worn by work, in her eyes that ask not for pity but for dignity, the millionaire finds an unexpected path to true humanity. Like this, if it touched your soul, it's more than a click. It's a silent embrace. Comment on how you think this story will end, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it costs you nothing, but it means a lot to us. Thank you for being here. In the glass penthouse of Manhattan's Upper East Side, where the city blurred into a horizon of elegant buildings, Victor Sterling contemplated his empire from the heights. At 38, his name was synonymous with success in corporate circles across the nation. Heir to a modest tech firm he'd transformed into a colossus, Victor personified the modern dream. Young, powerful, admired, the reflection the window returned was that of a man with sharp features, an impeccable suit, and a penetrating gaze. Behind that reflection, however, lay an emptiness that no bank balance had managed to fill. His calendar overflowed with commitments, but his personal life was reduced to a minimalist apartment where silence resonated louder than any conversation. "Mr. Sterling, dinner is served," a soft voice announced from the living room doorway. Victor turned slightly. Maria Lopez, his housekeeper, stood with her hands clasped in front of her apron. She was a woman in her late 50s, with premature graying and a silent dignity in her posture. She had been working for him for 3 years, and in all that time Victor had barely noticed her presence beyond the impeccable service she provided. "Thank you, Maria. I don't have an appetite. You may go for today." The woman nodded, with an almost imperceptible bow, and headed to the kitchen. Victor returned his gaze to the illuminated city. A call on his cell phone interrupted his thoughts. It was Mark Valdez, his principal partner. "The investors are uneasy, Victor. They want guarantees that the staff reduction won't affect productivity." "The numbers speak for themselves, Mark. We've eliminated redundant departments. Efficiency will increase." "Sharon has doubts. She says the work environment—" "Sharon always has." "Doubts?" Victor cut in with irritation. "Tell her that feelings don't trade on the stock market. We'll discuss it at the meeting tomorrow." Hanging up, Victor loosened the knot of his Italian silk tie. His reflection in the glass no longer projected the same security. There was something in his eyes, a shadow of fatigue that no business victory seemed to dispel. He headed to his bedroom, passing the kitchen. The door was ajar, and for an instant he caught the image of Maria meticulously putting away the leftovers of the dinner he had rejected. Her movements were precise, economical, as if every gesture was part of a choreography rehearsed for years. It was curious, Victor thought, how someone could occupy a space in your daily life and, at the same time, be completely invisible. That night, like so many others, Victor fell asleep reviewing financial projections on his tablet. His dreams, when they came, were an extension of his days. Figures, charts, and meeting rooms where he always remained alone, even when surrounded by people. The meeting with the Japanese investors had run late. Victor returned to his penthouse after 10 o'clock. The tension accumulated after hours of negotiations. The apartment was dimly lit. Maria must have left already. He set his leather briefcase on the sofa and headed to the kitchen looking for something to quell the hunger he had ignored all day. As he approached, he heard a sound, something metallic, followed by a plastic rustle. He stopped, puzzled. Could there be an intruder? He cautiously advanced to the kitchen threshold and in the darkness distinguished a silhouette crouched next to the garbage can. His hand reached for the light switch. The sudden glare revealed Maria Lopez on her knees in front of the container, her hands plunged into a trash bag. Between her fingers, she held remains of rice and chicken from the meal Victor had left untouched the day before. The woman froze, eyes wide, fixed on him, as an expression of deep shame transformed her face. "Mr. Sterling, she stammered, awkwardly getting up, dropping the food scraps. Victor remained motionless, unable to process what he was seeing. Maria, always impeccable, always proper, rummaging through the trash for leftovers. "I wasn't expecting you here," he finally said, noticing how his voice sounded strangely distant. "I forgot my purse. I was picking up something that—" Maria tried to compose herself, smoothing her apron with trembling hands. Victor then noticed details he had never seen before. The extreme thinness of her wrists, the pronounced dark circles under her eyes, the way the uniform hung loosely on her, as if her body had shrunk inside it. "Maria," he interrupted with a softness that surprised even himself. "Are you hungry?" The question hung in the air. Maria lowered her gaze, and the silence was more eloquent than any answer. Victor felt a sharp pain in his chest, a physical discomfort he didn't immediately recognize as shame. "Please sit down," he indicated, pointing to one of the kitchen chairs. "I'm going to make something." "It's not necessary, sir. I was just leaving." "I insist." For the first time since he had known her, Victor truly looked at Maria as she sat rigidly in the chair. Her hands, cracked from years of domestic work, were nervously clasped on the table. Victor opened the refrigerator and took out eggs, ham and cheese. He had never cooked for anyone, but he vaguely remembered how to make an omelette. As he beat the eggs, an awkward silence hung between them. Victor felt Maria's gaze fixed on his back, probably as surprised as he was by this unexpected turn. "Why?" Victor finally asked without turning around. "Why look for food in the trash? I pay you a salary." Maria took a few seconds to respond. "It's not enough, sir," she said softly. "Not with 2 grandchildren in my care." Victor turned around, the whisk still in his hand. Grandchildren? He had never imagined Maria as a grandmother, never wondered if she had a family. "You have grandchildren?" The question sounded stupid even to him. "Andrew and Luke, 14 and 10 years old. I've been taking care of them since my son and his wife." Her voice broke. "My daughter-in-law abandoned them after the accident." Victor served the omelette on a plate and placed it in front of Maria. Then he sat down on the other side of the table, a gesture so unusual it seemed almost surreal in that space where they had never shared anything before. "Eat," he said, and it wasn't an order but something closer to a plea. Maria picked up the fork with trembling hands and began to eat slowly, as if each bite were a treasure to be savored. Victor watched her in silence, feeling something stir within him. It wasn't pity, it was something else. Something that made the distance between the two of them, sitting at the same table, seem suddenly abysmal, and at the same time insignificant. For the first time in years, Victor Sterling felt small, and that feeling, strangely, was not entirely unpleasant. The next morning, Victor woke up with the image of Maria, rummaging in the trash etched in his mind. He showered and dressed mechanically, with the uncomfortable feeling of having discovered something he shouldn't have seen, as if he had inadvertently violated another person's privacy. When he left his room, the aroma of fresh coffee filled the apartment. Maria was already there, efficient as always, folding freshly ironed clothes. Seeing him, she bowed her head slightly in greeting without mentioning the incident from the night before. "Good morning, Maria," Victor said, stopping next to her instead of walking past as he usually did. "How are you?" The question, so simple for anyone else, sounded strange on Victor's lips. In 3 years, he had never inquired about his employees' well-being. "Fine, Mr. Sterling." "Thank you," she replied, visibly uncomfortable. "Your breakfast is ready." Victor nodded and headed toward the kitchen, but stopped before reaching it. "Maria, would you like to have breakfast with me?" The woman looked at him with confusion, as if unsure she had heard correctly. "It's not necessary, sir. I've already had breakfast." Victor watched her, wondering if that was true or if she was also economizing with her own food. "I insist," he said, using the same tone as the day before. With evident discomfort, Maria followed him into the kitchen and sat across from him. Victor poured coffee for both of them. Steam rose between them like a translucent curtain separating 2 worlds. "Tell me about your grandchildren," Victor asked after a long silence. Maria held the cup between her hands, as if seeking warmth in it. "Andrew is 14. He's a good boy, but his father's death affected him greatly. He's at a difficult age." A gentle smile lit up her tired face. "Luke is different. He's 10 and very smart. He loves to read, especially science books. His teacher says he has potential for engineering, but—" her voice trailed off. "But—" Maria took a sip of coffee before answering. "Luke says that's not for people like him, that he should think about something more realistic." Victor felt a pang upon hearing that. How many times had he heard similar phrases from his own father? "Sterlings don't dream, we build." The difference was that his father had limited his dreams out of ambition, not necessity. "Where do you live?" he asked. "In the Bronx, sir. I have a small apartment there." Victor knew the borough only by name, one of those places on the outskirts of New York he had never had reason to visit. "How do you get here every day?" "Subway and bus. I leave at 4 in the morning to get here on time." "At 4? Victor couldn't hide his surprise. "But you start at 6. Transportation from the Bronx takes time, sir, and before coming here I clean offices in Midtown." Victor set his cup down on the table with more force than necessary. 3 years. For 3 years, Maria had been working 16 hours a day, traveling across the city, cleaning for him and for others, without him having bothered to ask anything about her life. That day, Victor arrived late to his meeting with the investors. For the first time since he took over the company's presidency, something more important than business occupied his thoughts. At the end of the day, he didn't take his sports car from the private parking garage. Instead, he asked the company chauffeur to drive him home. Upon arrival, Maria was finishing her chores. "May I drive you home?" Victor offered. "We have the car downstairs." Maria looked at him suspiciously, as if suspecting a trap in his offer. "It's not necessary, sir. I'm used to the subway. Please, I insist, it's late and—" Victor hesitated for a moment. "I'd like to see where you live." The request was so unusual that Maria didn't know how to refuse. Half an hour later, the luxurious vehicle was entering the narrow streets of the Bronx, so different from the Upper East Side that they seemed to belong to another city. The chauffeur looked at them through the rearview mirror with evident curiosity. Victor looked out the window, absorbed. Small businesses with worn signs, old buildings with peeling facades, groups of young people talking on the corners. A different energy pulsed in those streets, something authentic that contrasted with the aseptic coldness of his world. "It's here," Maria indicated when they reached a reddish brick building. Victor got out of the car and accompanied her to the entrance. The hallway was clean but deteriorated, with dented metal mailboxes and an elevator that seemed to function intermittently. "Would you like to meet my grandchildren?" Maria asked timidly. "They're upstairs." Victor felt a sudden unease. His instinct told him to retreat, to return to the car and the safety of his world, but something stronger urged him to nod. Maria's apartment was small, but impeccable. A living dining room with old but well-kept furniture, a hallway leading to 2 tiny bedrooms, and a kitchen where barely 2 people could fit. On the sofa, a sullen-looking teenager was playing with an outdated cell phone, while a younger boy read a worn physics book. "Boys, this is Mr. Sterling, my employer," Maria introduced. The teenager, Andrew, barely looked up. Luke, on the other hand, put down his book and approached with curiosity. "Do you own a tech company?" he asked, his eyes shining with interest. Victor was surprised by the direct question. "Yes, we develop software and systems for large corporations." "That's interesting," Luke exclaimed. "I'm reading about electrical circuits. Is it true that everything runs on artificial intelligence now?" Victor found himself answering increasingly complex questions from a 10-year-old who absorbed information like a sponge. Maria watched them from the kitchen with a mixture of pride and sadness, preparing tea with the few provisions she had. When Luke mentioned his dream of studying engineering, Victor noticed Andrew snorting with disdain from the sofa. "What's wrong?" Victor asked, addressing the teenager. Andrew looked up, surprised someone was paying attention to him. "Nothing," he muttered, "just that it's useless to have those dreams. College costs money, and we don't have it." The harshness of that reality struck Victor. For him, money had never been an obstacle, but a means he took for granted. For these children, it was an insurmountable barrier. During the ride back to his penthouse, Victor remained silent, contemplating the city lights with a new perspective. New York had always been a game board for him to strategically move his corporate pieces. Now, for the first time, he saw human faces behind those illuminated buildings. That night, Victor didn't review financial projections before sleeping. Instead, he searched for information about the U.S. education system, university scholarships, and support programs for single-parent families. When he finally fell asleep, his dreams were no longer populated by figures and charts, but by narrow streets and voices that had previously been invisible to him. The boardroom of Sterling Technologies occupied the top floor of the corporate building. A polished oak oval table reflected the tense faces of the board of directors. Victor, sitting at the head, observed his partners with an unreadable expression while Mark Valdez presented the restructuring plan. "The cut will mainly affect maintenance and administrative staff," Mark explained, sliding his finger across the touchscreen. "We will outsource those services to a company that charges 40% less than what it costs us to maintain the current payroll." Sharon Montero, the only woman on the board, frowned as she took notes on her tablet. At 45, she represented the more moderate voice of the group, although her pragmatism usually aligned with the majority decisions. "What will happen to the current employees?" she asked, without looking up from her screen. "Minimum legal severance," Mark replied with a shrug. "They are easily replaceable profiles." Victor, who had remained silent until then, straightened in his seat. The words "easily replaceable profiles" resonated in his mind, along with the image of Maria rummaging in the trash. "How much exactly would we save with this cut?" he asked. Mark smiled, interpreting the question as a sign of approval. "Approximately $3.2 million annually." "And how much did we spend last year on the renovation of the executive offices?" The question fell like a stone into a pond. Mark blinked, confused by this unexpected turn. "About $5 million, but that was an investment in corporate image, not an operating expense. And on bonuses for executives. $7.8 million, but that's a necessary incentive to retain talent." Victor stood up and walked to the window. From there he could see the city stretching, out under a grey winter sky. Somewhere in that sea of buildings, hundreds of people like Maria were struggling daily to survive. "I will not approve the cut," he finally said, turning back to the table. The silence that followed was dense, almost palpable. Mark was the first to react. "Victor, this is already decided. The investors expect it. The investors expect profitability, and they will have it, but not at the expense of the basic staff." Sharon looked up from her tablet, studying Victor with curiosity. "What do you propose then?" Victor returned to the table and sat down. "I propose a 15% cut in executive bonuses, including mine, and a reduction in expenses for corporate travel and public relations events." The tension in the room intensified. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. "That's unorthodox," Sharon commented, with an expression that didn't reveal whether she approved the idea or not. "I also propose creating an employee wellness program," Victor continued. "Help with housing, education, daycare, things that really impact their lives." "That's absurd," Mark exclaimed, slamming his hand on the table. "We are not a non-profit, Victor. We are a top-tier tech company." "Exactly," Victor calmly replied. "And our most valuable asset is not the servers or the code, but the people who make it possible. All of them." The meeting ended in a climate of palpable tension. Victor knew he had sown a seed of discontent among his partners, but for the first time, in years, he felt he was making a correct decision, not just a profitable one. Leaving the room, Sharon caught up with him in the hallway. "What's going on with you, Victor?" she asked in a low voice. 2 weeks ago, you would have approved that cut without batting an eye." Victor stopped, considering how much he could trust her. Sharon had been his ally in many corporate battles, but they had never shared anything personal. "Let's just say I've started to see things I didn't see before," he replied enigmatically. "Does it have to do with that report in the Bronx newspaper?" At Victor's surprised expression, Sharon smiled slightly. "Yes, I saw it. Not your usual neighborhood." Victor remembered the small, impromptu interview he'd given as he left Maria's building. Just a few words about the dignity of the working-class neighborhoods that had apparently caught attention. "I'm just trying to better understand our employees," he finally said. "All of them. Be careful, Victor. Mark won't stand by. He's already talking to shareholders." "I know. And I still don't understand what you intend. But..." Sharon hesitated for a moment. "I'm intrigued by this new Victor Sterling." When Victor arrived at his penthouse that afternoon, he found Maria preparing dinner. Without saying anything, he rolled up his shirt sleeves and began setting the table for two. Faced with Maria's astonished look, he explained, "I'd like us to have dinner together. I have something important to ask you." During dinner, Victor listened intently as Maria told him about her daily routine. She left home at 4 in the morning, cleaned offices until 5:30, arrived at the penthouse at 6, worked until 3 in the afternoon, then cleaned another house in the Upper West Side until 7, and finally returned to the Bronx to care for her grandchildren. Maria, What would you do if you could dedicate yourself to just one thing? Victor asked when she finished her story. The woman looked at him bewildered. I don't understand the question, sir. If you didn't have to clean 3 different places to make ends meet, what would you like to do? Maria remained silent for a long time, as if she had never considered that possibility. She began timidly, I would like to have time to learn things. I always wanted to study nursing, but I got married very young, and then the children came. Her voice faded, as if that dream belonged to another life. And what would it take for Luke to be able to study engineering someday? Maria's eyes moistened. A miracle, Mr. Sterling. Victor nodded, thoughtful. He didn't believe in miracles, but he did believe in decisions, and he had just made one that would change not only Maria's life, but his own. The news exploded in the financial media like a bomb. Victor Sterling, CEO of Sterling Technologies, cancels staff cuts and announces employee wellness program. Reactions were immediate. Some analysts questioned the decision from a strictly economic viewpoint, while others celebrated it as an example of corporate social responsibility. In the company's offices, the atmosphere was one of bewilderment and expectation. The basic staff, those Victor had never truly looked at, now watched him with a mixture of disbelief and hope when he passed through the hallways. Mark Valdez, for his part, did not hide his disapproval. During subsequent meetings, his hostility manifested in biting comments and constant questioning. The rift between the two partners widened daily. One morning, while Victor was reviewing proposals for the new wellness program, his assistant informed him of an unexpected visit. It's Ms. Montero, sir. She says she needs to speak with you urgently. Victor was surprised. Sharon rarely came to his office without an appointment. Send her in. Sharon entered with a determined stride and closed the door behind her. She wore a dark grey suit and an expression Victor couldn't interpret. Mark is organizing a confidence vote, she announced without preamble. He wants to remove you from the presidency. Victor leaned back in his chair, processing the information. He wasn't surprised, but he hadn't expected the confrontation to come so soon. Who are his supporters? He has Herrera, Gomez and Ruiz on his side. Jenkins is undecided. The rest? It's hard to tell. And you? Victor asked, looking her directly in the eye. Sharon held his gaze. I haven't decided yet. That's why I'm here. I want to understand what you're really doing, Victor. This change, and it doesn't make sense from a business point of view. Sit down, Sharon. Let me tell you a story. For the next half hour, Victor told her about Maria, his discovery in the kitchen, the visit to the Bronx, Luke and his dream of being an engineer, Andrew and his hopelessness. He told her about a world that had always existed around him, but that he had never truly seen. It sounds noble, Sharon said when Victor finished his story, but it also sounds like a midlife crisis, or worse, an attempt to clear your conscience that could sink the company. It's not about me, Victor replied. It's about recognizing that our success is built on the work of people like Maria, and understanding that we can be profitable without sacrificing the dignity of those who work for us. Sharon stood up and walked to the window, reflecting. Can I meet her? She finally asked. Maria? Victor didn't expect that request. Yes, if I'm going to bet my career on this vote, I want to see for myself the person who has transformed you so much in so little time. That same afternoon, Sharon accompanied Victor to his penthouse. Maria received them with evident nervousness, not understanding why Mr. Sterling's partner wanted to meet her. Sharon silently observed Maria serving the tea she had prepared, noticing the worked hands, the dignified posture despite the evident fatigue, the gaze that reflected a life of silent struggle. Maria, could you show me a picture of your grandchildren? Sharon suddenly asked. Timidly, Maria took a wrinkled photograph from her purse showing Andrew and Luke in front of a modest birthday cake. This is my Luke the day he turned 10, she explained, with a pride that lit up her face. His teacher says he has a scientist's mind. And Andrew, he's at a difficult age, but he has a good heart. As Maria spoke of her grandchildren, her personality transformed. The timid, serving woman gave way to a proud grandmother who dreamed of a better future for her own. When they left the penthouse, Sharon remained silent for much of the elevator ride. Finally, just before reaching the lobby, she pressed the stop button. I will vote in your favor, Victor, she said, looking him in the eyes. Not because I think your plan is the best from a business point of view, but because it's the right thing to do. and because I'm starting to think that perhaps doing the right thing is also good business in the long run. On the day of the vote, the tension in the boardroom was palpable. Mark had prepared a detailed presentation on the financial risks of Victor's new strategy. The charts showed downward projections and warnings about market reaction. When it was time to vote, Victor didn't use presentations or data. He simply spoke from the heart, explaining his vision of a company where economic success was not incompatible with human dignity. Our employees are not numbers on a spreadsheet, he concluded. They are people with dreams, responsibilities, and families. And the real value of our company is not in the buildings or the patents, but in the people who make it possible, all of them. The vote was close. 5 votes in favor of keeping Victor as president, 4 against and 1 abstention. The decisive vote had been Sharon Montero's. Mark left the room without speaking to anyone, but the expression on his face made it clear that the war was just beginning. Leaving the meeting, Victor received a call from Maria. The woman's voice was trembling. "Mr. Sterling, something has happened with Luke. The school called. He's in trouble." "I'm on my way," Victor replied without hesitation. At that moment, as he headed to the elevator under the surprised gazes of his employees, Victor understood something fundamental. The value of a name was not in the buildings he built or the bank accounts he accumulated, but in the real difference he could make in people's lives. The public school in the Bronx was a functional building of red brick and narrow windows. Victor walked down the hallways filled with children's drawings until he reached the principal's office, where he found Maria sitting next to Luke. The boy had his head bowed and a bruise on his cheek. "What happened?" Victor asked, sitting down next to them. The principal, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, gave him a curious look before answering. "Luke got into a fight with another student during recess. He's normally an exemplary child, which is why we're so surprised." Maria seemed distressed, her hands nervously twisting a handkerchief. "Why, Luke?" Victor asked the boy directly. Luke looked up, and Victor saw something he recognized well in his eyes: wounded pride. "Alvin said it was stupid to want to be an engineer, that people from the Bronx are only good for collecting trash," Luke mumbled. "And then he laughed at my grandma, said she cleans houses because she doesn't know how to do anything else." Victor felt a pang of indignation. He looked at Maria, whose face reflected a mixture of pain and resignation, like someone accustomed to this kind of humiliation. "Luke," Victor said, leaning toward the boy, "violence is never the answer, but defending your dignity and that of your family is always the right thing to do." The principal cleared his throat, uncomfortable with Victor's unconventional response. "Even so, sir." "Sterling," Victor introduced himself. "I'm a family friend." The principal nodded, evidently impressed by the presence of a man in a designer suit in that modest school. "Even so, Mr. Sterling, we have rules. Luke will have to stay after class all week as punishment." "I understand," Maria intervened humbly, "and I assure you it won't happen again." When they left the office, Victor stopped in the hallway. The walls were decorated with school projects about trades and professions. He noticed that the children had drawn their parents as doctors, police officers, firefighters, but none as cleaning or maintenance staff. "Luke," he said, crouching down to the boy's level, "do you know why that boy, Alvin, is wrong?" Luke shook his head. "Because the hands that clean, that collect, that organize, are just as important as the ones that design or build. Without them, nothing would work." Victor looked at Maria. "Your grandmother has the most valuable hands I know." Luke's eyes lit up slightly. "But I want to study. I want to be an engineer," he murmured, "even if Alvin says it's impossible." "It's not impossible," Victor affirmed firmly, "and I'm going to show you why." That same afternoon, Victor took Maria and Luke to the offices of Sterling Technologies. The boy gazed in wonder at the modern spaces, the latest generation computers, the touch screens that covered entire walls. Victor led them to a room where several engineers were working on developing new software. Seeing the CEO enter, they all became tense. "I want to introduce you to Luke," Victor said. "He's 10 and wants to be an engineer. Could one of you show him what you do?" Eliza Gomez, a system engineer in her early 30s, approached with a smile. "I can explain our project," she offered. "If you're interested in programming, Luke, you're going to love this." For the next hour, Luke remained absorbed as Eliza explained basic programming concepts, showing him how a simple line of code could create movement on the screen. His eyes sparkled with enthusiasm, asking increasingly complex questions that surprised even the engineer. Victor watched the scene from a corner, next to Maria, who was holding back tears, seeing her grandson so happy. "I've never seen him like this," she whispered, as if he suddenly saw a path open before him. "That path has always been there, Maria," Victor replied. "Just no one had shown it to him." As they returned to the Bronx, Luke couldn't stop talking about everything he had seen. For the first time since Victor had known him, the boy sounded truly hopeful. In the apartment, they found Andrew lying on the sofa with a sullen expression. Seeing them enter so animatedly, he sat up with curiosity. "What's going on? Why are you so happy?" "I saw how video games are programmed," Luke exclaimed, running to his brother. "An engineer taught me everything, and she told me I could work there someday." Andrew looked at Victor with distrust. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, directly. "What do you gain by helping us?" The question struck Victor with its honesty. He didn't have a simple answer. "Not everything in life is about gaining something, Andrew," he finally replied. "Sometimes it's about giving back." "Giving back what? You don't owe us anything." Victor looked at Maria, who was preparing a simple dinner with the few ingredients she had in the fridge. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "I owe you more than you can imagine." That night, as he returned to his empty penthouse, Victor made a decision. The next day he called his lawyer and began the procedures to create the Root Foundation, a program aimed at providing educational support, housing, and job opportunities to the families of Sterling Technologies employees. When he asked Maria to become the director of the program, the woman looked at him as if he had lost his mind. "But Mr. Sterling, I don't have a degree. I wouldn't know how to—" "You have something more important than a degree, Maria. You know the reality of the people we want to help because you have lived that reality, and you have integrity, something that isn't learned in any university." Maria accepted with tears in her eyes, and Victor felt that for the first time in his life, he was building something truly valuable, something that wasn't measured in bank figures, but in human dignity. The news of the foundation spread quickly. Some media praised it as an example of social responsibility. Others criticized it as a marketing strategy. Victor didn't care. All that mattered to him was the expression on Luke's face when he received the news that he would have a full scholarship to study at a specialized science and technology school. And above all, he cared about the growing certainty that the true value of a human being was not in what they possessed, but in what they were capable of building with their hands, whether they were those of an engineer, a housekeeper, or an entrepreneur who had finally learned to see beyond the numbers. The campaign against Victor began subtly, first rumors in the hallways, then articles in financial blogs questioning his emotional stability, finally a leak to the press about supposed economic problems at Sterling Technologies. Mark Valdez orchestrated the offensive from the shadows, using his contacts in the business world to sow doubts about the company's new direction. Stocks had fallen 8% in 2 weeks, and pressure from shareholders increased day after day. One rainy morning, Victor found Sharon waiting for him in the cafe near the office. Her expression was serious. "The Japanese investors are reconsidering their involvement," she announced without preamble. "They've heard you're diverting company resources to personal projects." Victor stirred his coffee, watching how the dark swirl reflected the confusion of his own life. "The Root Foundation is funded with my personal capital, not company funds," he replied calmly. "And the employee wellness program is generating results. Absenteeism has dropped by 15%. Productivity has increased." "I know, but perception matters as much as reality. Mark is fueling fear, and fear spreads faster than data." Victor nodded, aware of the truth in Sharon's words. In the business world, trust was a fragile currency that could be devalued with a simple rumor. "What do you suggest?" "A meeting with the main shareholders, total transparency. Show them the numbers, but also the vision. Make them see that this is not a midlife crisis, but a solid long-term sustainability strategy." Victor met with the shareholders 3 days later. The presentation was exhaustive. Charts showing the correlation between employee well-being and productivity, testimonials from satisfied clients with the company's new philosophy, financial projections that, although less aggressive than before, remained solid. When he finished, the silence in the room was dense. Finally, Akira Tanaka, representative of the Japanese, investment group spoke. "Mr. Sterling, your numbers are convincing, but your change in philosophy has been abrupt. We wonder if there is something we are not seeing." The question hung in the air like a veiled threat. Victor could feel the distrust in the shareholders' eyes, the suspicion toward a change they did not understand. For an instant, he considered giving a purely technical answer, talking about studies on corporate social responsibility and long-term return on investment. Instead, he decided to risk everything with the truth. "What you were not seeing, Mr. Tanaka, is the same thing I failed to see for years. The real people behind our company. Allow me to tell you a story." He told them about Maria, his discovery in the kitchen, the visit to the Bronx, Luke and his wasted potential. He told them about a system that normalized the invisibility of those who sustained it. "My vision has not changed," he concluded. "I still want Sterling Technologies to be a leader in innovation and profitability. The difference is that now I understand that our best investment is people, not just as resources, but as complete human beings." When he finished, the expression on the shareholders' faces had changed. Not everyone seemed convinced, but something had shifted in the room. Tanaka adjusted his glasses and nodded slightly. "In Japan, we have a concept called kyosei, which means living and working together for the common good. Perhaps your new vision is not as radical. As it seems, Mr. Sterling, we will remain investors for now." The victory was partial, but enough to give Victor the time he needed. As he left the meeting room, he ran into Mark in the hallway. "Nice speech," his former friend said with a strained smile. "But sentimentality doesn't keep a company afloat." "No, Mark. What keeps a company afloat is trust, the trust of customers, of employees, of investors. And trust is built with honesty, not manipulation." Mark narrowed his eyes, the hostility now undisguised. "This is not over, Victor. You've won a battle, not the war. There is no war, Mark. Only different visions of what a company can be." That afternoon, Victor visited the provisional headquarters of the Root Foundation, set up in a small space in downtown New York. Maria greeted him with a tired but genuine smile. She no longer wore a cleaning uniform, but a simple blouse and formal trousers. Her new position as director had given her a confidence Victor had never seen in her. "We have good news," Maria announced, leading Victor to a small office. 5 more families have requested housing assistance, and we have reached an agreement with an academy to provide scholarships for 10 students next semester. Victor observed the map on the wall where small thumbtacks marked the homes that had received support from the foundation. Each thumbtack represented a family, a story, a future that was changing. "How is Luke?" he asked. Maria's face lit up. "Transformed. In his new school he has teachers who value him. He's made friends who share his interests, and Andrew—" She hesitated for a moment. "Andrew is changing too. He has started attending the Foundation's vocational guidance program. He's interested in carpentry." Victor smiled, feeling a warmth that no business success had ever provided him. "Maria, there is something I must tell you," he said, regaining his seriousness. "The company is going through a difficult time. There are people who oppose what we are doing." Maria looked at him with a quiet wisdom that always surprised him. "I know, Mr. Sterling. There is always resistance when something truly changes. I want you to know that no matter what happens to the company, the foundation is secured. I have transferred enough personal funds to guarantee its operation for at least 5 years." Maria nodded, grateful but not surprised, as if she had learned to expect the best from him. "Do you know what Luke told me last night?" she asked with a smile. "He said that when he is an engineer, he wants to work at Sterling Technologies, to give back what you have done for us." Victor felt a lump in his throat. The innocence of that ambition, the simple nobility of the desire to give back, contrasted painfully with the manipulations and power struggles he faced in the business world. "Tell him his position will be waiting," he replied, "but to do it not for me, but for all the Lukes who will come after." Leaving the foundation, Victor received a call from Sharon. Her voice sounded worried. "Something has happened, Victor. Someone has leaked confidential information about the wellness program, manipulated data suggesting it's costing twice the budget." "Mark," Victor murmured, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk. "Probably, but the important thing now is to contain the damage. The media is already calling for confirmation." Victor took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the battle that had just begun. "Prepare a press conference. For tomorrow. Total transparency, we're not going to hide. As he hung up, Victor looked up at the grey New York sky. The path he had chosen was difficult, but for the first time in his life, he was absolutely certain it was the right one. The price of truly seeing the people around him could be high. Perhaps it could even cost him the company he had worked so hard to build, but the cost of remaining blind was immensely greater. The press room was packed. Journalists from financial media, television cameras and financial bloggers were squeezed into a space designed for half the attendees. The murmur of conversations and the clicking of cameras created a nervous buzz as Victor, seated behind an austere table, checked his notes one last time. Sharon, by his side, gave his arm a slight squeeze. "Are you sure about this?" she asked in a low voice. "Once you speak, there will be no turning back." Victor nodded. He had spent the night preparing his speech, discarding drafts full of corporate jargon and defensive statistics. He had finally decided to do what he had never done before at a press conference: speak with absolute sincerity. The communications chief gave the signal, and the flashes began to fire. Victor took a deep breath and leaned toward the microphone. "Good morning. I appreciate your presence here today. Normally in these situations, companies hide behind technical statements and abstract terms. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk to you about real people." A murmur ran through the room. This was not what the journalists expected. "A few months ago, I discovered that my housekeeper, a woman who had worked for me for 3 years, was collecting food scraps from my trash because she couldn't afford to feed herself properly," Victor continued, noticing some journalists exchanging surprised glances. "This woman was working 16 hours a day at 3 different jobs to support her orphaned grandchildren, and I, who considered myself a brilliant businessman, had never seen her reality." The silence in the room was now absolute. Victor could feel the tension, the disbelief, the growing interest. That discovery changed the way I understood not only my company, but the very purpose of business. The question I asked myself was, what is the point of creating wealth if it perpetuates a system that normalizes the invisibility of those who sustain it? Victor then explained the wellness program, the Root Foundation, and the changes implemented in the company. He presented real data, admitted the initial costs, but also showed the first positive results: lower staff turnover, increased productivity, improvement in the work environment. "I know some of you have received manipulated information about these programs," he said, looking directly at the cameras. "I invite you to visit our facilities, talk to our employees, review our books. We have nothing to hide, because what we are doing is neither a marketing strategy nor a passing fad. It is a deep conviction that the true business innovation of the 21st century will be to redefine the relationship between corporate success and human dignity." The questions that followed were incisive, some hostile. A journalist from the Financial Times questioned the responsibility to shareholders. Another, from The Economist, insinuated a personal crisis. Victor responded to everything with a candor that disarmed even the most skeptical. Finally, a young journalist from a digital outlet raised her hand. "Mr. Sterling, if you had to summarize your new business philosophy in one sentence, what would it be?" Victor thought for a moment before answering. "The true value of a company is not what it builds, but who it builds." The press conference ended, but Victor's words began to resonate. In the following hours, social media was filled with debates about his intervention. The hashtags human value and Sterling effect became trending topics. Some criticized him as naive or hypocritical. Others celebrated him as a visionary. That same afternoon, as Victor returned to his office, he received an unexpected call from Teresa Fuentes, director of a major educational foundation. "Your speech has impressed me, Mr. Sterling," she said without preamble. "I would like to explore possible collaborations with your Root Foundation." Before the end of the day, 3 similar calls had arrived. A bank interested in creating a microcredit program for low-income employees, a university offering full scholarships, a construction company willing to participate in affordable housing projects. Sharon entered his office with a cautious smile. "Looks like you've struck a nerve," she commented, placing a folder of press clippings on the table. "Not everyone agrees, but everyone is talking about it." Victor reviewed the headlines. Some were frankly hostile. "Sterling loses his way, philanthropy or failed strategy." Others, surprisingly positive. "The CEO who saw the invisible," A new way to understand business. What are the stocks saying? He asked. They've gone up 3%, Sharon replied. The market is confused, but intrigued. Victor nodded, satisfied. He didn't expect an immediate victory, but to start a necessary conversation. And Mark? Sharon's expression darkened. He hasn't come to the office today, but his allies on the board are unusually silent. That night, Victor visited Maria and her grandchildren. The small apartment was more lively than ever. Luke proudly showed him a computer program he had created at his new school, a simple application that calculated the optimal study time based on the difficulty of the subject. It could be useful for workers too, the boy explained enthusiastically, so they know how much rest they need depending on how hard their job is. Victor listened in wonder, seeing in this boy the future he had always imagined for his company, innovation with human purpose. Andrew, normally sullen, approached as a... Luke continued to explain his project. I saw what you said on television, he commented quietly. It was brave. It was the first compliment Victor had received from the teenager, and it meant more to him than any corporate award. When he was leaving, Maria walked him to the door. You've started something important, Mr. Sterling, she said, with that quiet dignity that always impressed him. Something that goes beyond us. Victor nodded, aware of the responsibility his public words implied. It was no longer just about Maria, Luke, or Andrew. It was about all the invisible people who sustained a system that rarely acknowledged them. The true words, Victor understood, have a power that transcends elaborate speeches and communication strategies. When they are born from authentic experience and sincere conviction, they can initiate transformations that no advertising campaign could ever achieve. And that was just the beginning. 3 months after the press conference, the Root Foundation had moved to a larger building in a central New York neighborhood. What had begun as a modest initiative now had a team of 12 people and alliances with 3 universities, 2 banks, and several companies that had joined the project. Victor toured the new facilities with contained pride. The walls, previously bare, now displayed photographs of families who had benefited from the programs, along with their handwritten testimonials. In a large room, several teenagers were taking programming classes. Among them was Luke, now a kind of assistant for the younger children. Maria approached, holding a folder. Nothing remained of that timid woman Victor had known. In her place, a serene and effective leader had emerged, coordinating the programs with natural authority. The first quarter results exceed our expectations, she reported, showing him a chart. 63 families are receiving housing assistance, 42 students have full scholarships, and the vocational training program has found employment for 29 people. Victor nodded, satisfied but not surprised. He had learned that when real opportunities were given to determined people, the results always exceeded expectations. How is the publishing project going? He asked, remembering the idea they had discussed weeks ago. Maria smiled, guiding him to a small office at the end of the hallway. On a table were several book mock-ups with the Root Publications logo. The first title will be released next month, she explained, handing him a copy. Invisible Voices, Stories of Everyday Dignity. We have collected 15 testimonies, including mine. Victor leafed through the book with contained emotion. The pages collected stories of people who, like Maria, had lived in invisibility. Domestic workers, cleaning staff, elderly caregivers, night watchmen. Each story was accompanied by a photographic portrait where the protagonist looked directly at the camera without artifice, with the simple dignity of someone who has a story that deserves to be heard. It's perfect, Victor murmured. This is exactly what we needed. As they left the office, they passed Andrew, who was carrying several toolboxes. The teenager had changed as much as his grandmother. His sullen expression had given way to a responsible seriousness, and his hunched posture had transformed into a confident uprightness. Good afternoon, Mr. Sterling, he greeted formally. We're going to install shelves in the new library. I'll help you, Victor offered, taking off his jacket. Andrew seemed surprised but nodded with something close to respect. As they worked together, Victor noticed the incipient calluses on the young man's hands, testament to his recent interest in carpentry. Maria tells me you're making furniture, Victor commented, holding a board while Andrew took measurements. I try, the teenager replied modestly. The workshop teacher says I have a good hand. Do you like it? Andrew paused for a moment, considering the question with a seriousness inappropriate for his age. "I like creating things that last, that have utility," he finally replied. "Before, I thought only money mattered, that work was just work. Now I understand that what you do and how you do it matters." Victor nodded, recognizing in those words the echo of his own transformation. "You know, my company started by making computer components," he commented. "My father used to say that the important thing was not the final product, but the precision of every piece, no matter how small." For the first time since they had known each other, Andrew smiled openly at Victor. "Like in carpentry," he said, "a table is only as good as its joints." That afternoon, when Victor returned to his office at Sterling Technologies, he found Sharon waiting for him with a serious expression. "Mark is back," she announced, "and he's not alone. He's brought an American investment group. They want to buy 15% of the shares." Victor sat down, processing the news. That percentage, added to what Mark and his allies already controlled, would give them a majority on the board of directors. "How much time do we have?" 3 days. They're meeting right now at the Ritz Hotel, finalizing the details." Victor remained silent for a few moments, weighing his options. He could try to match the offer, but his personal resources were committed to the foundation. He could look for friendly investors, but in such a short time it would be difficult. "Call an extraordinary board meeting for tomorrow," he finally decided, "and send invitations to all department heads, including the basic staff." "Everyone?" Sharon seemed bewildered. "Victor, this is not a matter for—" "It is precisely a matter for everyone," he interrupted softly. "This company legally belongs to its shareholders, but its real value is created by everyone who works in it." The next day, the boardroom was more crowded than ever. Alongside the usual executives, programmers, receptionists, maintenance and security staff were squeezed in. The tension was palpable, especially when Mark entered, accompanied by 3 men in impeccable suits and impassive expressions. Victor stood up, and the murmur of conversations gradually ceased. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I know this is unusual, but what we are going to discuss today affects every person in this room." In simple words, Victor explained the situation, the investment group's offer, what it would mean for the company's direction, the possible changes in the philosophy they had begun to implement. "I'm not here to ask you to take sides," he clarified. "I'm here for you to understand what is at stake, and because I firmly believe that everyone deserves to know where the company they work for is headed." Mark stood up, visibly irritated. "This is irregular and potentially illegal," he protested. "Board matters are not discussed with the staff." "We are not voting, Mark," Victor replied calmly. "We are only informing with transparency, something we should have always done." Eliza Gomez, the engineer who had shown Luke the programming systems, stood up. Her voice, normally soft, resonated with an unexpected firmness. "I've been with this company for 8 years," she said, looking alternately at Victor and Mark. "In recent months, I've seen changes I thought would never happen. My team is more motivated, stress-related absences have decreased, and for the first time, I feel like my work has a purpose beyond financial profit." A murmur of assent ran through the room. Other employees began to share similar experiences. The family reconciliation program that had allowed a single mother to keep her job, the scholarships for employees' children, the transformed work environment. Mark watched with an increasingly uncomfortable expression as one after another, the workers he had considered easily replaceable proved to be the true heart of the company. When the meeting ended, the American investors requested a private conversation with Victor. "Interesting strategy, Mr. Sterling," the one who seemed to lead the group commented. "I've never seen a CEO involve the basic staff in high-level management matters." "It's not a strategy," Victor replied sincerely. "It's a conviction." The man studied him with professional curiosity. "We're going to reconsider our position. Perhaps there is more than one way to generate value." The next day, Mark submitted his resignation. The American investors decided to maintain their current shares without increasing their participation. The immediate crisis had passed, but Victor knew it was only the beginning of a longer journey. Victor contemplated the penthouse where he had lived for the past 10 years, the minimalist furniture, the abstract works of art, the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a privileged view of New York. All of it now seemed strangely empty to him, like a perfect photograph where Nothing breathes. He made a decision that surprised everyone. He sold the penthouse. He moved to a modest but warm apartment in a residential neighborhood. It wasn't the Bronx, but it wasn't the Upper East Side either. It was a place where neighbors greeted each other in the morning, and where the stores had owners with names and surnames. Part of the sale money went to consolidating the Root Foundation. Another part financed the publishing house that would publish stories of invisible people. The first book, which included Maria's testimony, became an unexpected success. One afternoon, while supervising the move, he received a call from Sharon. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble. "I want to be more involved in the foundation, not just with money, but with time." Victor smiled. The transformation was not only his, it spread like ripples in a pond, reaching people he never would have imagined. "Maria is waiting for you," he simply replied. Root Publications presented its second book, Hands That Hold, a collection of stories about essential workers. The event was held at a cultural center in the Bronx. Among the audience, Victor distinguished familiar faces: Sterling Technologies employees, beneficiaries of the foundation, curious neighbors, and some journalists. Maria, dressed with simple elegance, introduced the authors. Each one took the stage with initial shyness that transformed into pride as they read fragments of their stories. "The extraordinary thing," Maria said as she closed the event, "is not that these stories exist, but that they are finally being heard." Amid the applause, Luke approached Victor. "My teacher says I might apply for a scholarship for the special technology program," he commented with bright eyes, "and Andrew has received a commission to make furniture for a coffee shop." Victor nodded, aware that real change happened like this, not in grand, dramatic gestures, but in concrete opportunities that opened doors previously closed. At the end of the event, an older man approached Victor. His face looked vaguely familiar. "I'm Emilio Jones," he introduced himself. "I worked 40 years at the company your father founded. I retired just when you took over the direction." Victor shook his hand, ashamed not to recognize him. "Your father was a tough but fair man," Emilio continued. "He always said that a company is like a tree. If you take care of the roots, the branches will flourish on their own." The words resonated in Victor as an echo of something he had always known but had forgotten. His father, despite his limitations, had understood something fundamental that he had to rediscover in the most unexpected way. A year after the night, he discovered Maria rummaging in the trash. Sterling Technologies presented its annual results. Against all odds, the numbers were positive: modest but solid growth, staff turnover reduced to an historical minimum, and a customer satisfaction index that set a record. Forbes magazine published an extensive article titled "The Sterling Experiment: When the Humanization of Work Generates Profits." Other companies began to show interest in the model. Victor, however, did not feel like a business revolutionary. He felt simply like someone who had learned to see. One afternoon, while visiting the workshop where Andrew was learning carpentry, he watched the young man shape a piece of wood with absolute concentration. "What are you making?" Victor asked. "A desk," Andrew replied without looking up. "For Luke, for when he starts college." College, a possibility that months ago seemed an impossible dream and was now a real path. Victor felt immense gratitude for having been part of that change. "It's beautiful," he said, admiring the care with which Andrew worked every detail. "Because it's for someone I love," the young man replied simply. "That's the difference." Victor nodded, understanding the profound truth in those words. The difference was always there, in doing things out of obligation or out of love, in seeing numbers or people, in building empires or futures. Victor's new house, although smaller than the penthouse, had something the previous one lacked: a dining room that could fit a large table, and that table, made by Andrew with oak wood, became the heart of his new home. Around that table, he began to regularly gather diverse people: Maria and her grandchildren, Sharon, company employees, foundation beneficiaries. The dinners were simple, but plentiful. The conversations flowed naturally between people who, in the stratified New York Victor had inhabited before, would never have crossed paths. One night, as Maria served rice pudding made according to her grandmother's recipe, Luke announced that he had won first prize in a national programming contest. His application, designed to optimize public transport routes in peripheral neighborhoods, had impressed the jury with its social focus and technical sophistication. Victor watched. The scene, feeling a fullness that no business success had ever provided him. In Luke's eyes, the future shone. In Maria's worked hands, the dignity of the present. In Andrew's smile, the reconciliation with a past of scarcity transformed into strength. As they shared the dessert, Victor understood that true wealth was not in accumulating, but in sharing. Not in rising above others, but in growing alongside them. On the second anniversary of the Root Foundation, Victor was invited to give a lecture at Columbia University. The auditorium was full, students, entrepreneurs, curious people, attracted by the story of the CEO who changed his vision. Victor began by recounting, without drama but with honesty, the night he discovered Maria rummaging in the trash. He described how that moment had broken the bubble he lived in, forcing him to truly see those around him. "We believe that success is about rising so high that we don't have to look down," he said. "But when we finally look, we discover that what sustains the entire structure are precisely those we have stopped seeing." He spoke of the transformation of his company, the foundation, the publishing house, not as personal achievements, but as necessary reorientations toward a more human way of understanding success. True progress, he concluded, is not having more but being more. It's not seeing who gets the highest, but making sure no one remains invisible. Among the audience in the front row, Maria listened with contained tears. Beside her, Luke took notes with the concentration of someone absorbing every word. Andrew, now a young carpenter with a small business of his own, watched with quiet pride. At the end of the lecture, a student raised her hand. "Don't you fear that other companies will see your approach as naive or impractical?" Victor smiled before answering. "What I truly fear is a society where human dignity is considered impractical. Fortunately, I am discovering that there are many of us who believe in a success that includes, not excludes, a success where no one has to be invisible for others to shine." That night, Victor had dinner at Maria's house. The table was simple, the food homemade. The conversation flowed naturally. Luke spoke of his university plans. Andrew showed photographs of his expanded workshop. Maria commented on the foundation's new projects with the naturalness of someone who has found her true calling. Victor watched this family that unexpectedly had intertwined with his life. He thought of his former self, the man who lived surrounded by luxury but empty of real connections. He seemed like a stranger, someone he barely recognized. Saying goodbye, Maria walked him to the door. "You know, Mr. Sterling," she said with that serene wisdom that always impressed him, "sometimes the invisible is not what we cannot see, but what we choose not to look at." Victor nodded, understanding the profound truth in those words. His journey had not been about discovering something new, but about learning to truly look at what had always been there. As he returned home under the starry New York sky, Victor felt a quiet certainty. The path he had begun that night in his kitchen had no final destination. It was simply a different way of walking through life, a way in which every person, every story, every worked hand, and every postponed dream deserved to be seen, heard, and valued. Because in the end, Victor understood, the most valuable things are not the things we possess, but the eyes with which we look at the world.